Yeah, thank you so much for the welcome. I feel very grateful to be here today. It's my first time in Chile, and this is amazing. I'm very happy to be here and to play a concert tonight and to spend some time with you today. One thing you should know about me is one of my favorite thing is to improvise in music. This is where I find myself at the most pure element. So that means that I also do this in moments like this. I have no plan. So maybe I thought the only plan that I had was to maybe play a bit at first, just a few minutes, in that spirit of having no plan, and then we see where this goes, if that's okay. Cool, nice. Thanks. Maybe I tell you a little bit about myself, where I come from, and how why I ended up here today, if I can figure it out. But and specifically what I just played, which is kind of like a newish interest that I have. To kind of strip things down. I mean, I've always been very interested in repetitive music. I like to call this, and I used to say electronic dance music, but actually it's repetitive music, because I find a lot of those aspects in a bunch of other music, a bunch of folk music, and also a bunch of actually kind of classical music. You know, I've been always a big fan of Steve Reich and Philip Glass and a lot of those composers that were interested in repeating stuff. And so actually it's something new in my life that I can kind of start to trust this thing, because I've spent quite a lot of time, and probably today we will talk a lot about Mr. Tigran Hamasyan, which is the reason I'm here in Chile. The reason I traveled a lot in my life is to play with him and his music. And I will call it this thing, it's his music, because this is a bit how I feel. He created such a crazy style. I think he invented something. And when I joined his band 10 years ago now, it felt really like I'm there to kind of like provide him this invention that he made. And it's only recently that I started to kind of a bit start to find my own sound within this and my own interests. And what I just played is exactly what I don't play with Tigran. And that's why I thought it was interesting to start with this, because it's what interests me right now in my life. Very dry, percussive, something that actually doesn't feel much like a drum set. I'm going back into this visceral feeling of the drums and dead drums and repetition and finding subdivisions between subdivision, exactly what we are not really doing with Tigran. So that's for me very important also to be able to play a bit of this for you today. So yes, I started playing the drums when I was 8. My first teacher, he was a very jazz-oriented teacher. So very quickly, I think he saw the potential in me, but he showed me a lot of jazz-related things. So bebop, tradition, and which was interesting, especially since in Switzerland, it's not such a big culture, this kind of music. But he showed me a lot of this, and I started to play a lot of jazz very early in my life. And very early with other people. I was 12, 13 when I started being in bands and playing with other people, specifically jazz. And so this started to build as an interest. And so when I was a bit older, I decided to apply to go to study jazz in New York City in the United States. And so I moved there when I was very young. I realize this now, that being 19 and move somewhere very far like this alone was a pretty big move. At the time, I didn't really realize it. I was so driven, but I realize it now that I actually changed a lot of things in my life too, to move there and to start studying this music. And of course, New York provided a lot of opportunities to play and to meet people. Actually, was very lucky to very quickly in my life meet Camila Mesa from Chile. And I played with her quite a lot. And yeah, so this kind of idea of coming from a tiny little country in Europe and then arriving in this giant city, and then immediately your friends, your family are people from all over the world. So it's still something that I think impacted my life quite a lot. And then I met Tigran actually then, during those years. And something I usually get asked, so I will answer it immediately now, about my meeting Tigran. It was a very, very slow process, meaning this is what I usually like to remind people also nowadays, where I meet a lot of people that are very driven by social media and business or career, and this idea of like how how does it work? How can I get this kind of idea that you can skip through stages? But actually, for me, meeting Tigran was a very slow thing. It's the person you meet once at a jazz club. He was playing, and then I knew someone who knows him, and I just say hello. And then a year later, you meet again in somewhere else. And then slowly I started hanging out and taking lesson a lot with Nate Wood. He was a very important person in my life. Also kind of, he was new in New York. I think I was his only student. And then, yeah, I'm starting to go to see a lot of his shows. He showed me Tigran's music. And so slowly like this, kind of among many years, it took until Nate couldn't do one of the shows, the typical thing where I got asked to sub for Nate for one concert. And then I met Tigran, and then he asked me for more, the typical thing. But all that to say that it actually was a very slow process, in multiple years of just keep meeting, keep playing together. We actually one time even played some music. He doesn't remember at all, by the way. This is also just, this is important to remember. It's like sometimes you meet people and you, in your life, it feels like you, it was an important moment, but actually for the other person, it's maybe is a passing thing. But then later in life, you realize you become best friends, whatever. But it's funny to realize for me now that actually all of this process was a very slow thing, and I like to remind myself this because I have a feeling in multiple parts of our lives we have to do this again. So yeah, so I started playing with him quite a lot and moved away from the United States. I first went to Berlin. Specifically during this period, I was starting to be more and more interested in electronic music. It's actually, I've been interested in electronic music since I'm a teenager. I was listening to a lot of this stuff before, but for some reason in the United States and in the jazz school that I was, it was not cool at all. No one around me told me this is a nice thing. I would be listening to Aphex Twin or drum and bass. I was really into Photech and like a lot of more aggressive kind of music. And people in my class, they didn't like this. They told me this is not really good music. So it took me a while actually to kind of fight this back. And actually one of the first person who really allowed this to me was Mark Juliana, who was of course a drum hero of all of us. But for me, he was the first person that I could play like sometimes also quite overtly popular music. You know, I was also listening to a lot of you know, Genesis and Phil Collins and stuff like this. And he's the first person who was like, this is great music. You should totally be able to be proud of that. You love a type of music, maybe it's cool to expose yourself, like physically, your body, into a place where this music is a culture, which is of course a crazy privilege, but I realize that it changes everything when you can put yourself in a culture. Yeah. Sure, let's do this. With Tigran, it's very specific in the way that, like I said before, it's his music. I mean, he has a vision that is so wide about specifically rhythm. I mean, we all know that he's pretty good with rhythms, but he's actually pretty good with drums too, with the actual instrument. His vision of what the drums should do is pretty specific. So usually, I'm not even involved much when he's composing, right? When he's composing, he has already a vision of what the drums should be doing. And usually the way he communicates this with us is by making demos. So he's actually, and I'm not sure, he's not even using the computer, he's using like one of those Roland keyboards where you can record inside, you know, like multi-tracks. And so he's making demos with really kind of cheap sounds, but it doesn't matter for him. For him, it's more like he's composing this way, he's finding his parts, he's finding the bass line, he's finding whatever he wants, and then he records all of this and sends it to us. So usually I get a recording. I don't get charts, I don't get anything, but just like a piece of audio. And it happened in the past that I was always able to do one track at the time, you know, because we would be playing something that's already released. So I'm playing this, and then he says, oh, this is a new song, and I could slowly add songs. But for the last album, for The Call Within, we had a big break before because he was touring with his choir and other projects. So he just sent me a chunk of like, here's 15 songs. So it was a lot. And then he said, just learn this. It was just, learn it and let's meet before recording. So yes, so what happens? No, I usually don't use paper and any kind of like writing down. What I do is two things. First, I always ask him, can you please describe it? Because this is something that's funny with his music, is most of the time there's actually one idea. There's just one for the whole piece. Like it can be like, oh, I figured out that whatever number 7 plus 7 plus 7 equals 21, but it also is like 3 plus 3 plus. He comes up with those kind of like math-based ideas, and then he translates this in music, and then actually the piece keeps just evolving which version you are playing. So most of the time, if he explains this to me, it's already a big help. To not just listen to the music, but him saying it's actually 5, 5, 5, and 7 or whatever. Yeah. So but this is by words. It's on the phone. I just call him and say, tell me what is this. So the grid and Entertain Me are good examples of pieces that he wrote when he was 14 or something. And he has on his computer, on his desktop, he has like a folder that's called music. And then you open it and there's like 54 MP3s, and they're all completely finished songs. They're done. And he has them for many, many years. So one time we were in the train in France somewhere, and he was like, we're about to record Mock Root, and he was like, yeah, it would be cool to have another song. So he opened it, and then he just went through it, and then he found this one thing called, I think I have it here, he had like a thing called track 18. And then he just opened it, and it was Entertain Me, but finished. I mean, completely done. So he was just like, oh, that could be cool. I remember I did this back when I was a teenager. Let's record this. And then he just sent us the thing. So I think I have it. Hopefully it's not too loud. Is it this one? It's also way faster than how we played it at the end. But so this is really him playing the drums with the fingers on a keyboard. He's playing. He can play all those parts on a keyboard, like with the kick and this. Yeah. Way longer I think it's about to change. I know that's a good example of a song where it's about to stop soon because he only had this. He only had that first part. So that's what he had in his computer on the way to a gig in France. So he was just like, hey, here's an idea. This is a cool riff. I had to find a C part, so he just, at sound check, he found a C part. But so we had this. And so we were very lucky at that moment that we were on tour and we knew had to record the album. So this is very helpful because you immediately together, right? So sound check would just be rehearsals. We were also on that same tour. He would write the venue, say, is there any way we can show up 5 hours before? Come very early because we need to practice, and we would just practice this, but together. So that was very helpful to actually do it together. It takes many, many, many hours. We had to do this many times, but to actually do it together was pretty helpful. And I enjoyed this, and I knew this, that we can spend time together. But now for the rest of the other songs, it was more like, here's some songs, learn this, right? So that's entertained me. I think the grid was this one. It's 31 minutes long. It's like a really, and again, like the sounds are very funny, I think. But it's just the sound you get in the keyboards if you go to whatever drum sound, you know? But the fact that he had this riff, he wrote it somehow, somewhere at home, you know, like many years before, thinking he's gonna play it. And so for us drummers, it's interesting to see how much information there is. I mean, it's not like, here's a piano riff. It's more like, here's drum parts, like, where are the snares? Sometimes I even ask him, do you want exactly those snares? Or is it improvised? We always have to have this discussion, what is him going nuts on the drums, or is it a part? And so this I knew he wants the drums to go free. I should be able to play free over it. But then maybe it goes to the next part. I'm not sure if it's a good example, but there's other moments where he says, no, the snare are very important because they line up with whatever piano part, and specifically the relationship between snare and kick. Like, I think for him it's very important. I go a bit further in the song. I mean, this is 10 minutes in the song. It's he had to condense this. So this, I knew he wants exactly this, like the ta ta kum kum ka ta ta kum kum ta ta kum kum ta ta kum kum ta ta kum kum ta. So this usually is very clear. Snare, kick, those are composed. It's an idea he has. It has to be exactly this. All the little cymbal-y stuff, crashes. So, like all those parts that we know from the final recordings, they're already there. They're with a little splash sound, but. So basically, there's a lot there, and that's most of the time when people ask me, how do you come up with those parts? It's actually, I didn't come up with much. I don't come up with much. What I come up, and this is actually my favorite moment, it's when first, it's almost like transcribing music, you know, if you say, hey, you have to check out kind of music, or learn a new style, or a new culture. I think it's very important to first have this, I will check it out exactly how it is at first, right? Before being like, let me do my own thing over it. I usually say, okay, I should probably be able to play pretty close to how it is on the demo, in order to just be able to show up and say, hey, Tigran, look, I can play your thing. And then I think comes the more interesting part for me, is I'm to say, may I suggest a different thing, you know? And this, usually what I can suggest are not where the kick and where not rhythms, but more maybe textures. And this is where, you know, the choice of cymbals. I mean, he can hear the difference between closed hi-hat, a bit closed, a bit open, slightly open, and really open, you know. Like for him, these are different sounds, and they should not be treated the same, you know. So we really constantly, even now, I mean, we were at soundcheck, and he was like, you know what, on this part, I actually think it's this one, the little stack I have here, you know, this one is too aggressive, maybe it's cooler if you do it on the smaller one. He knows in his ears, he knows the difference between this one, the bigger one, the really open crash, the more rivets, right? I mean, all those sounds are different, you know. So my goal is to have those sounds already and to be able to kind of suggest what could make sense in the arrangement. But what are the rhythms? Most of the time he comes up with the core ideas, you know. I can suggest which sounds, and of course the improvisation parts, which there are actually a lot of moments where he says, no, just go crazy. In this section is just, the drums should be kind of almost soloing over it, right? Yeah. So I think for me, what is important, specifically if you're thinking about transitions, how you jump from one section to the other, is to actually be able to kind of sing it, to be able to sing the main parts. And so I didn't do this with the grid, but I remember because I was with him and we did it together, but when I first joined the band, he wanted to play Vardavar, this other song, and I remember saying like, you know what, it would be helpful if I can play this on the piano, just the basic pattern, the first one, right? Just to have it under my finger, and I have a feeling whether you do it physically to learn an instrument, but it's more, can you actually sing along? And I think I do quite a lot of this with my students when we talk about rhythm and drums. It's more like, are you able to keep a very simple pulse and sing the parts over it, So nowadays, I wouldn't recommend what I'm doing now, so I will not talk about it. But I used to be pretty specific. It's almost like you have to treat it almost if you're aware about how meditation works. I've been meditating for a long time, and I have a feeling it's a similar thing. And I used to do this at the school to first of all get rid of this concept of time. People tell you, "Wow, I practice 4 hours," and then you're like, "Wow, this doesn't exist, right? No one cares how long you practice." It's more about how effective and focused that practice can be. And so I used to do this like as a routine. It's more to kind of have some kind of a ritual. So I've read this book about this technique about learning stuff that's called the Pomodoro. It's not so important how it's called, but it's this idea of like there's a set amount of time and then there's a set amount of break, right? And so I used to do this to just do 20 minutes, put my phone on, 20 minutes. When I was back in the time, there was no social media really, or a bit of Facebook, but I remember how it was easier to do this with the phone. Maybe you have to use another object, but put 20 minutes and do only one thing, just only one thing. Focus completely on, it can be singing along, entertain me, or the grid. It can be, I'm just going to do some very technical drum stuff. It can be learning a song of any kind, but to really specifically do only one task for 20 minutes, and then very specifically take a break after this for 3 minutes. And then instead of thinking about how much time you practice, but to see how many of those sales did you do. So I remember thinking about this, cool, today I did 3, that was nice. And maybe those 3, they were really simple stuff, but actually felt better about myself to focus on this rather than on just like sitting there and say, now I will do 4 hours, which is usually a very hard thing to do. To break it down and to focus on only one thing. So this, I would recommend really, it's whatever you're doing, and if after 20 minutes you're like, I still want to do it, it was too short, great, do another 20 minutes with this exact same thing. But to make sure that you're not, because it's the tendency to start and then go somewhere else with the mind. I mean, this is where meditation comes, where I see it's the same thing, right? If you can focus on 20 minutes on only how your left hand is doing ghost notes, there's a lot of power in that, right? And so it has to be focused, because otherwise you just start to not really know what you're doing. Yeah. So that would be my recommendation for routines. Yeah. What I used to do a lot to practice this was to program using a computer, but now there's many apps that can do this too, to program stuff that are kind of click tracks, but that are already a musical thing, right? So to maybe have a click track that doesn't give you the quarter notes, but that just gives you this, what you were saying, those kicks, right? So and just to start treating this idea of like, there's just space, right? You see the bar starts, and then there's a couple hits, and then it starts again, right? And then this element, is it 5 notes in between those 2 first notes, or is it 3? And this just to try to practice going from one to the other while listening only to those kicks. Yeah, I would do this, and to not really, it's also okay to kind of slide into it and to be able to kind of be in between things. I find this actually quite interesting right now, but to practice it without having the pressure of the pulse, right? The pulse, you should be hearing this with the grid, is this dun, 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 right? Just this, and can you do that in a computer where it keeps playing those notes, and then you try to switch between the triplet feel or the quintuplets feel, right? So that's how I would suggest how to do it.
But obviously you have a great time feeling, right? So, So in your personal practice, daily practice, do you have some kind of method to?
Yeah, I do. I do now. It took me some time to kind of zone out of this and to try to, specifically now that I teach, I also have a lot of people asking me this, and I'm like, I have to figure out a way. And I think I figure out, there's one little concept that I think was very helpful for me in my life, is I think in the drum world, there's too much focus on subdivisions. People, how many Instagram stuff do I see where it's like all about, it's like all fully, I have a feeling, it's like painting, it's completely full. You're putting fully, there's no more space for silence, right? And I have a feeling this is easier. It's easier to go to someone and go, the file. Because your body is actually just rolling with it, but you're probably not hearing it really. So my idea was we have to play more simple stuff, actually. We have to almost go to a thing where there's a lot of silence. And so in Tigran's music, there's a lot of focus on the five, the concept of five. And so if someone also asks me how to practice the odd meters or fives, specifically fives, I usually say, let's forget about the concept of a five as a subdivision or as a meter, but more as a concept. And then I apply two ideas. One idea is what I call zooming in. You zoom into the subdivision. And then the other idea would be to zoom out of it. It's really like a Google Earth back then, when you can go very close and very out. The very close would be, let's focus on, can you hear all those subdivisions but alone? And I think a lot of people do this with 16th notes when they start. For me, I remember listening to Earth, Wind and Fire and like Tower of Power, all those funk bands where you hear like like all those kicks, trumpet kicks. And so I remember this kind of taught me what is the feeling of the second 16th note, right? But in silence, not in da 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 da, right? I'm just hearing ba, right? What is the feeling of the second 16? And we don't do this with fives, and I think we should. And so usually the exercise I show is specifically related to what a Tigran feeling a bit. It's like, let's say now the rules are like we play in five, but we only play the first note of every five, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, if it's in total silence, it just feels like a pulse, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. So first, that could be it already. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You hear it, the subdivision in your body, right? And then what I do is I put it in a beat, kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So where you have this relationship of the kick, snare, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 5. And now the exercise is to start displacing where the kick drum is playing. To start really hearing, can you hear the second quintuplet? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 2, 2. This is the second one, right? So usually when I do this, I put a metronome on that is with a hi-hat, but right? You get it, right? We try the second one. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now it's the third one. 2, 3, 4, 5. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So what is hard in this exercise, if you try at home, it's like, because you're not playing, your body is not physically doing the feeling up, right? It's only your head, only your mind and your ears, right? And that makes that you're actually starting to create a really refined connection to what is the fourth quintuplet. I'm really here. I'm hearing all the subdivision, right? But I'm focusing on the fourth one. And then this is the 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so now I'll go through them all. So this is a really, really good exercise already, and I think what it creates is this relationship where you're not focusing on playing, and I think this is to come back to time feeling, and and hearing the pulse and being able to play freely. I think this is one of the key elements, is to train yourself to not. Also drums, we have a tendency to put a lot of ghost notes. This could be a big problem for the time feeling, depending on if you're using this in order to hold yourself. If you can play all that stuff where it's more simple and you start speeding up or dragging or all that stuff, this is where you recognize that actually you should go back and just, are you able to hear all the subdivisions from silence, right? From really just a pulse. Right? So this is what I call the zooming in. You are focusing on, can we hear? Of course, immediately you can say we were doing it on the kick. You can do the same exercise where it's the hands. Now it's the... Right? Where you do the same with the hands. Then I would do also the same but with doubles, like... Instead of playing only one kick, I try to play two coming together. Start to sound like a Tigran beat. So you see, the essence of the exercise is quite simple actually. It's very simple in nature, but it trains something that's quite deep. Can you hear really? And is it in your body, right? And so I spend quite a lot of time with those exercises. And the goal, of course, is that at the end you do the same, but it's fully improvised, right? Improvising a phrase, a phrasing, and this is where it gets interesting, because now I'm improvising, but I'm also focusing on the subdivisions. And I think this is like an exercise that a lot of drummers, I think, kind of pass through too fast, because you can play it, because your hands can go back. So to actually go back to play more simple, but can you really hear the third quintuplet, right? So this is an exercise I think helps a lot in this genre of playing, let's say. And then the zooming out is the exact same idea, except now the pulse, we try to start to reduce we maybe say also 5, but now I will start to slowly cut down what I'm playing with on the hi-hat. So I'll just give an example. It's probably like so now what I'm doing is normal backbeat stuff with the hi-hat and then play every 5, 16 notes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3. And then, so that's one zoom out. Instead of doing this, I'm doing this now. Right? Right. I just zoomed out once again, right? And so, for me, this exercise is the exact opposite. Instead of going inside the quintuplets, we're trying to feel a really large pulse, and this is entertain me, basically, at the end. It's like, how do you practice those kind of beats? It's actually by playing repetitions of maybe complex patterns, but actually slowing down, you slow down the feeling of the pulse, right? So by going wait. Oh, there's also, now I skipped, I did only the 4 ones, but you could also, when we were here, like, instead of grouping those in 4 and slowing down, you're trying to group them in 3s, right? Okay. So basically the concept of the exercise is just that instead of going inside the subdivision, we are trying to add a repetitive pulse over something, right? And I think this trains something else. It trains this really wide kind of forms to try to hear a pulse over a lot of, which in Tigran's music there's very often this idea, right? Where the pulse is very repetitive but slow, and there's all this other stuff happening. And so this is kind of like my approach when it comes to trying to get comfortable with those subdivisions, is to always do a bit of both. Getting into the subdivision and then going out of it by slowing down the pulse of things.
Yeah, that's a super powerful tools, I think, because, for example, in Bartabar, do you have this kind of hip hop to the end?
Yes, yeah.
Which is transition to a kind of 4/4.
Yes.
Becoming from a more complex thing.
Yeah.
And sounds like really like the takes effect.
Yeah. And it's the idea of having those crazy rhythms, tac tac tac, ting 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 ting, and then actually ting 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 ting, just slower pulse over it, right? The thing can be fast in the bottom, but maybe the crash is doing something that's really, and this is most of the time this kind of feeling we know from more heavy metal feeling, where actually there's a regular pulse, except that the subdivision behind are very, very complex.
And this discussion about to go in the reverse thing, instead of go to the speed, speed it up and
actually slow it down.
So do you discuss that with your band members or your bandmates, or
not
or
really?
Something that like comes to your mind from go to?
It's just in his music there was a lot of this, so I was forced to practice it in a way. And there was moments where he was like, "No, I want it to be with those big crashes," and I was like, "Wow, how can I? I don't know how to do this, right?" Or like, I don't know this kick pattern. And adding on top this feeling, but it's actually I trained it by doing it in his music, and then I realize now when people ask me, how do I get better at time feeling? Actually, it's a powerful exercise to think about playing slower, actually, And it's the opposite of what people think. Oh, I want to always play more stuff. And actually, if you play slower stuff, it really trains your ears to hear all the very fine details in between. Yeah.
Probably it's for the fear to the space, or.
I mean, yes, it is. It's a complex exercise, but I would recommend you to think about it as both ways. And now we were doing it with 5, but maybe it's cool to do it with other stuff too, the 7s and the 11s, but also maybe just triplets and
Sure.
and 16th notes. And, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully it answers a bit. Thank you, thank you. Before we stop, I just want to say thank you, Guillermo. Thank you, Andy, for having the idea of inviting me. And yeah, hopefully I see some of you also tonight at the show, where it makes more sense with other people. Cool. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Thank you.